Welcome to this presentation on safe interactions with dogs. This is meant to give you a better understanding of how to keep yourself safe here at the shelter.
Whether you're a staff member or a volunteer, and whether or not you actually work hands-on with dogs, you will at some point interact with a dog while at the shelter because they're being walked throughout the shelter and outside of the shelter. They're all over. So it's important that everybody know how to safely interact with a dog. And our objectives for today to meet that goal are to first learn how to recognize dogs' body language and signs of escalation. So that means we can stop an incident from happening before that situation progresses to a dangerous one. We also will look at how we can reduce fear and stress during our interactions with dogs, and that has a lot to do with recognizing how human body language and the things we do can make them uncomfortable and cause a situation to escalate. The last goal or objective is that we identify ways to stay safe in threatening situations that could arise at the shelter. We're going to start by discussing how dogs use their body language as a signal to us of how they're feeling. Dogs communicate very differently than how humans communicate, so we have to know what they're telling us so we can help them feel safe and keep ourselves safe at the same time. The shelter is a really stressful place. Even great shelters like Nebraska Humane Society, they're not a comfortable home environment. They cause a lot of stress for the animals in our care, and we can do a lot of things to mitigate that stress, but it is still a shelter. So some of the things that we need to consider dogs are experiencing when they're in the shelter environment are, first of all, they're separated from their owner. So the person that they are bonded with has either left them there or they've been found as a stray and brought in or whatever their situation is, but the person that they are bonded with is not there. And disruption of that bond alone can cause a lot of stress in an animal. They're also in an unfamiliar environment and they have no idea why they're there. So all of that, again, creates more stress. They're confined to a kennel area, and even though we've got some great kennels, it's still confinement that they're probably not used to. And along with that comes a lack of control. So these dogs don't get to control where they want to go, who they want to interact with, what they want to go do because they're, again, confined to a small space and can't really control what time of day their kennel is being cleaned. All of that complete lack of control, again, creates stress in an animal. They're exposed to a lot of sensory information that's stressful. So loud noises like barking, the kennel doors shutting, people talking, all of that is stressful for them, as well as smells and pheromones that they're exposed to that could be coming from other animals or just things in the environment, can again create stress in the dogs. They're around people they don't know and dogs they don't know. They're having medical procedures, behavior evaluations, neighbor dogs that are barking. Again, all of this creating stress for them. And then on top of that, consider we don't know that animal's previous history. A lot of dogs that end up at Nebraska Humane Society are there because they were not being properly cared for. They might have been abused or neglected, and now they're in our care. And so they're exposed to something completely new. A lot of them might not be even used to being around people. And so, again, all of this is coming together to create fear, anxiety, and stress in the dogs. And so we need to understand how all of that comes together and can cause them to act defensively because they're in a very fearful state when they're in the shelter. We know that in response to stress, animals go into what is commonly called fight or flight mode, though it also can include other behaviors like freezing. So animals, they're in a defensive state of mind, which means they could act out aggressively in that so-called fight response by biting, lunging, snapping, etc. But anytime we have a stressed animal, there is a potential for aggression, which is why it's so important to understand an animal showing you fear and stress and how to adjust your approach to reduce that stress to prevent a dangerous situation from happening. Most of the aggression that we see in shelter dogs is typically coming from them being in a state of fear. So this is a quote from Jean Donaldson in her book, The Culture Clash, that I think really does a good job describing this. So she says, "The continuum of temperament is not one with fear and aggression at opposite ends of the spectrum and normal in the middle. Rather, at one extreme, there is relaxed, confident, highly affiliative behavior, and at the other end, the two-headed coin of fear and aggression." And really what that's saying is it's not that we have fear on one side and aggression is all the way over here. It's really all coming from the same place. And animals can react differently to that fear, but really what they're trying to do is defend themselves and make the scary thing in their environment go away, which in the shelter a lot of the time is going to be a person that's trying to interact with them or possibly another animal that they're seeing. So whether they're shutting down and freezing, they're fleeing and trying to get away, or they're acting out quote unquote aggressively, they're likely all coming from the state of fear and trying to use some type of approach to get that scary thing to go away. That's why it's so important, again, that we understand what dogs are communicating to us so we can make them more comfortable and keep ourselves safe. Like I mentioned earlier, dogs communicate so much to us through their body language using very subtle signals that a lot of people aren't trained to pick up on. And we kind of think of it like a puzzle, and we're putting all of these pieces together and interpreting how the animal is feeling and what approach to take. So those pieces of the puzzle are their different body parts. So we're looking at their eyes, their ears, their mouth, their posture, their tail, and we're putting all of that together and trying to interpret what that dog is telling us and then adjust our approach based on that information. So just like with humans, a lot of information is conveyed through eyes, and we see that with the shape of the eye in a dog and how that is related to tension in the face. So when there's more tension in the face, it can change the shape of the eye and convey that that animal is feeling more stressed or anxious or fearful. So when a dog is relaxed, there's going to be little to no tension in the face, and we'll see they have a round or almond-shaped eye like this dog here on the left. They might be blinking. That's going to be a signal for a calm, relaxed, or confident dog. Dogs that are more fearful are going to have more tension in the face. So like this dog in the middle, that's what we call a whale eye. So there's tension in the face. It's pulling the face back, and you can see there's the white sclera under the dog's eye being exposed. That again being a whale eye is how we know this dog is feeling fearful at the moment. So a lot of times these dogs might be staring at you. They're trying to keep their eye on the threat in the environment, but they're also trying to turn away at the same time. So that would expose that white sclera or that whale eye. The dog on the right is showing us a hard eye, and that's a threatening behavior and a threat signal. Again, trying to get the scary thing to go away. But if you see a hard eye, the eyes are generally round, a lot of tension in the face, and they're kind of hard to describe unless you see it. You know when you see a hard eye because it's kind of there's a glassy look in their eye, and they're occurring at the same time as all of these other threatening signals that you'll see and we'll discuss in the upcoming slides. Another thing we look at in the eyes is the pupil size. So in the photographs below, you see on the left smaller pupil size, and then on the right the pupils have become dilated. So this is controlled by the nervous system. As arousal increases, the pupils will dilate. There are other factors, for instance, light exposure. So out in the bright sun, you would expect to see smaller pupil size, and then in a darker room, you would expect to see bigger pupils. But if we're looking at it as a sign of arousal, a larger pupil size is telling us that that dog is in a higher state of arousal. That doesn't necessarily mean distress or fear, because arousal just means there's physiological arousal in the body, so we have to take into consideration the context. The dog could just be really excited, or it could be in a state of fear or panic. So we are going to look at the pupil size, but take that into account with what other signals and behaviors we're seeing from that dog to gauge if that is an indicator that that dog is feeling very stressed or fearful. We also look at the movement of the eyes. Dogs might have something they're focusing on. So this dog here on the left is clearly focused on something in its environment. On the other hand, you might have a dog with its eyes kind of darting back and forth or scanning the environment. All of these would indicate most likely a higher level of arousal, and with a dog that's scanning the environment, a higher state of vigilance because it is in a more stressful state. We also pay a lot of attention to eye contact. Dogs generally don't make a lot of eye contact with each other or with people, and if they do, it's generally a threat behavior. So if a dog is making a lot of direct sustained eye contact with you, that would probably be a threat when you're looking at it in combination with other signals that they're sending. More fearful dogs, you'll see really do everything they can to avoid eye contact. So like this dog on the right, turning his head away, doing anything to avoid looking at you in the eyes. That's what we see a lot with a more fearful dog. Another body part we look at are the dog's ears. So this dog here on the left, those are his ears in the natural position. That dog is pretty neutral, probably mildly stressed, but generally pretty content. His ears aren't really telling us a whole lot. This dog in the middle, his ears are pulled back. That's a dog that's probably feeling more fearful or cautious about what's going on. Anytime we see the ears back or flattened, that is generally going to be a fearful dog. However, that can happen with other emotions as well. The dog on the right has his ears pushed pretty far forward, so we assume that he's pretty focused or alert to something in the environment. Dogs with droopy or cropped ears can be a little bit harder to read, but their ears do follow that same general movement. So you can see this Basset Hound on the left on top here. Her ears are back a bit. She looks a little bit more nervous or worried, versus the Basset Hound on the right. Her ears are more forward and she looks more content for a Basset Hound. On the bottom left, the guy with the cropped ears, he looks a little bit more nervous. His ears are back, versus the dog on the right with the cropped ears. His ears are more forward and he looks more alert or focused on something. We also look at the mouth. So in these pictures we're looking at an open versus a closed mouth. This dog on the left here, he has an open mouth. He's probably panting, so mildly stressed. We'll talk about panting in a little bit being a low-level stress behavior. On the right, he has a closed mouth. There's a little bit more tension. It's pretty clear he's kind of focused on something from his eyes, so he might be feeling more concerned or worried when we look at that picture on the right. If we're looking at movement, so maybe he goes from an open mouth to a closed mouth, there's probably something in the environment that now he's focused on. If you're in his line of eye contact and he goes from an open mouth to a closed mouth, that would be a reason for concern because he's now feeling less comfortable. If, on the other hand, he goes from a closed mouth like on the right to then having an open mouth and slightly panting like on the left, that would tell us he's probably relaxed a little bit and feeling more comfortable in his environment. Another thing we look at with the mouth is the shape, and especially the shape of the lips. So on the left here we see a dog with a long lip. So this dog is feeling pretty fearful and tense. You can see that tension kind of pulling the mouth back so the end of the mouth is almost in line with the eyes. That's a pretty nervous, fearful dog. The dog to the right of him with the short lip, this is a dog that's probably on the verge of biting. You can see the mouth is moving forward, still a lot of tension, but that lip is short, and you could imagine the next step would be if somebody's hand is approaching and it gets closer, there's probably going to be a snap. The third picture over, we have a pucker or a lip curl. So this is a dog that if, again, something is getting closer, we're probably going to see a snap or a bite. There's kind of a wrinkling in the nose and a very short mouth. And then the dog all the way on the right is baring its teeth. We also call that lip lifting. That is a dog that is sending a very clear signal that it wants to be left alone, and if whatever it is continues to approach, there will likely be a snap or a bite. It is important to distinguish between smiling, or what is sometimes called a submissive grin, versus showing teeth, baring teeth, lip lifting. So if you see in these photos below, compare the body language between the two dogs. The dog on the left has squinty eyes, ears pulled back, and her teeth are showing, but she's likely doing a submissive grin versus the dog on the right. Ears are kind of out and forward, a harder eye, and wrinkled nose with teeth out. So that is a dog that's doing a threatening display versus the dog on the left, which we might call smiling, but really is more of an appeasement type behavior that we'll talk about in a little bit. So we do occasionally see dogs at the shelter that smile. It's generally, like I said, an appeasement behavior. But again, look at the whole picture. What else is going on with their body? If they are loose and wiggly and approaching you while showing teeth, that's a smile, versus the dog that's very tense and showing some of these other behaviors and then also exposing their teeth. That is a dog that's showing a threat behavior. Though it's not body language, we do also pay attention to the vocalizations that a dog is making. A dog that is whining is probably feeling pretty anxious. We also see that with excitement, but in the shelter, it might indicate that dog's feeling anxious. With a dog that's growling, that is a warning signal that that dog's uncomfortable and wants space. Snarling is kind of moving up the ladder that we're going to talk about here in a minute, more of a threat behavior. And then barking can mean a lot of things. If you have a dog at home, you know dogs bark for all kinds of reasons. That's why we say if you're unsure what the dog is barking about, pretend to hit the mute button and just look at their body language. The dog at the bottom on the left, he is clearly much more tense. His ears are kind of out to the side. He's showing teeth as he's barking. That's a dog where the barking is much more of a threat, versus the dog on the right looks to be like a dog that's barking more from excitement. Another thing we look at is the position of the tail. So there can be some variation with this depending on breed. So we have breeds like pugs who have tails that go up high on their backs versus other breeds that tend to carry their tails lower. However, we can generally make some assumptions about how a dog is feeling based on the position of their tail. So this dog on the left, this is a dog with a neutral tail. You can see it's just kind of running parallel out from its spine. That's what we consider neutral. That's a dog that's probably pretty content, relaxed, feeling okay. Next to this, we have a dog with a low tail. So you can see it's not running parallel from the spine, but it's hanging a little bit lower. It's not all the way tucked like the dog next to him, but it's just hanging a little lower. This might be a dog that's a little bit nervous or cautious. The dog with the tail that's completely tucked under its body is probably feeling very fearful in that moment. That's a pretty classic sign of a fearful dog. And something we don't really think about often is that a really high tail can also be an indicator that something dangerous could happen. So the dog with the high tail on the right, when we see the tail in that position, that dog is in a high state of arousal. So if, for instance, there's another dog in front of this dog, his tail is high like this, he might be giving some other signals that we're seeing on his face, like a hard eye or staring, ears forward. This is an alert, focused dog, and it might be an indicator that the situation could escalate if things continue on. Of course, we also see movement in the tail, and that gives us some information as well about how a dog is feeling, but we have to consider that in conjunction with the position of the tail and what else is going on in the body. So there are different types of movement we might see. Back and forth sweeping movement we see a lot with greetings. We sometimes see dogs get really excited, have a helicopter tail where their tail is just spinning in circles. Sometimes just the very tip of the tail wags. But what we have to keep in mind is that a wag is not necessarily an indicator that a dog is feeling happy or friendly. Once again, a wagging tail is just an indicator of arousal, and that can be positive or negative. So we have to consider the whole picture. What else is going on in the body? What behaviors is the dog showing? What's the position of the tail? A lot of times when people are introducing their dogs to other dogs, they're really just looking at the tail movement. And if we have a really high tail and it's maybe just the tip of the tail that's wagging, that really is not telling us that the dog is friendly. It's just in a heightened state of arousal and things could still go bad. So we're looking at the whole picture and not just a wagging tail. We also look at where the dog's weight is, whether one particular body posture you may see at the shelter is dogs rolling over to expose their bellies. You might see this in their interactions with other dogs, which can be them self-handicapping during play or essentially showing submissiveness to another dog. When you see dogs do this with people, we often think the dog wants a belly rub, but nervous dogs will do this as an appeasement behavior to tell you they mean no harm and they want to be left alone. Rolling over is often considered a cutoff cue, or sometimes we call this tapping out. You can tell whether the dog is exposing its belly as a cutoff cue or because he actually wants a belly rub by looking at the rest of his or her body language. So in this photo on the left, if you look at what else is going on in the body, he's got squinty eyes, an open mouth, he looks relaxed. But this dog on the right, you see his ears are back, he's licking his lips, his eyes just look worried. So even though they're both exposing their bellies, they're telling us something very different. So this dog on the right is not a dog that wants a belly rub. He's asking for space, and in this situation, we shouldn't try to touch him. We should give him that space. If you've ever seen a dog's hair stand on end from its shoulders along its spine all the way down to its tail, that's what we refer to as hackles. So the actual term for this is piloerection, and it's a physiological response to arousal. That's why we get goosebumps when we're scared and why cats puff up when they feel threatened. It's not necessarily a sign of aggression. You have to consider the other body language you're seeing and the context of the situation. A lot of dogs will get hackles when they see another dog, but when they get the chance to interact for a little bit, they'll go away. It's common to see hackles on a dog if they feel nervous or threatened, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean the dog is aggressive. So to summarize, when we're looking at canine body language, these are some of the more subtle cues that we're looking at, the signals that they're sending us. So we're looking at the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the tail, the body, and we're putting that all together with the context or what's going on in that situation, and from that, piecing all of that together and trying to understand how that animal is feeling in that moment. In addition to looking at all of these subtle changes in body language, we're also looking at other visual cues. The canine ladder of aggression is one helpful approach to understand how dogs escalate from being mildly stressed or uncomfortable to the point of taking action using what we consider aggressive behavior. So as you can see on these lower rungs, these are behaviors that dogs are showing us when they are more mildly stressed and just asking for some space. So blinking, yawning, licking their noses, turning their head away, turning their body away, sitting, pawing at you, walking away, creeping, which is more like crouching, having their ears pulled back, tucking their tail under. And then as dogs get more uncomfortable and they continue climbing that ladder, we see some of the more overt behaviors like lying down, lifting their leg up, and then starting to prepare for action. So stiffening up, staring, growling, and then eventually, if whatever that stressor is in their environment continues to advance towards them, they might snap or bite. So what this is telling us is that we need to look for those lower level signals and adjust our approach so dogs don't have to escalate up this ladder. If they are higher up on this ladder and they're giving us these signals that they are uncomfortable and want us to back away, we have to understand that and again, like I said, adjust our approach. So move away, try a different technique, change our body language, like we'll talk about a little bit later. Something important that comes up here, growling. A lot of times owners will punish their dogs for growling, and what behaviorists say is you should never punish a dog for growling because that dog's giving you a signal that it's uncomfortable, and we have to understand that signal. If we punish it or if we ignore these behaviors, these signals that they're showing us, what can happen is dogs will learn over time that these signals don't work, so they will escalate up this ladder much more quickly, and instead of giving these lower level signals or giving a growl, they will just snap or bite. And that's something we see a lot in the shelter with these dogs from different backgrounds. A lot of them have behavioral issues that have escalated over time because their owners didn't know that these dogs are trying to communicate with us by showing us these signals, and instead they're punishing them or ignoring those signals, and now we have a dog that's snapping or biting anytime you touch it in a place that makes it uncomfortable, and now they can no longer have these animals in their homes with kids or whatever it is. So that's something important to consider with shelter animals, is we don't know their experiences and how quickly they will climb this ladder of aggression if they're uncomfortable. So we really have to pay attention to any signal that they're giving us, those subtle signals with their body language that we talked about, and some of these more overt behaviors that we have here. Now we're going to put these subtle and overt signals together and see how they fit into these more general behavioral descriptions that you have probably heard in the past. So all of the pictures on this slide, we see dogs that are relaxed, content, confident. So we see what we call soft body language, which means they're kind of loose and wiggly. They have a loose wagging tail in a neutral position, not too high, not too low. They have soft blinky eyes. They might be doing a play bow like this dog on the bottom right. These are all signals that that dog is comfortable, not stressed, doing very typical behaviors for a dog that is feeling pretty content. When dogs are mildly stressed or uncomfortable, we might see they start showing displacement behaviors. These are the behaviors we see lower on the rungs of that canine ladder of aggression. So these are normal behaviors that are being displayed out of context, and we might also hear them referred to as calming signals or cutoff signals. They are thought of as ways that they can signal to other dogs or to people that they're uncomfortable and stressed out. So these behaviors have an actual function, but they're occurring in some other type of situation where they're not being used for that function. So this dog that's panting, in this situation, he's not hot, he hasn't been exercising, he's not trying to cool off his body necessarily, he's stressed, so he begins panting. And so that's a displacement behavior. The dog that's scratching, he might not actually have itchy ears, he's just scratching as a way to displace some of that anxiety he's feeling. Dogs don't necessarily know that they're doing it, they're unconscious behaviors that they're showing. Same with the dog that yawns when they're stressed. We see this a lot with shelter dogs. Yawning is a very common stress behavior, so if you see it being paired with panting, licking their lips, things like that, that is a stress yawn and not an actual tired yawn. Dogs will shake off like they're wet, they might groom themselves or sniff the ground around them to kind of distract themselves. Those are all considered displacement behaviors. Dogs that are higher up on the ladder of aggression, or they're working their way up that ladder of aggression, might be showing appeasement or avoidance behaviors. So these are pacifying behaviors. They're meant to stop a hostile or aversive interaction by announcing the dog's fear. So these are all signals that are trying to communicate, I mean no harm to you, please leave me alone. So the common ones you'll see are lowered body posture, like this first dog up on the left. You might see a submissive grin like we talked about earlier. Exposing their belly. This is not a dog that wants a belly rub. This is an appeasement behavior to get you to go away and leave them alone. Licking lips or licking their noses is a very common one as well. It's somewhere in between displacement behaviors and appeasement behaviors. avoiding eye contact, so they're turning their heads away, they're looking away, anything to not look you in the eyes. We might see they lift a paw, like we talked about earlier on that ladder of aggression. These are all ways they're signaling to whatever it is in their environment that is a threat to them, that they want to be left alone, that they need more space. You might have seen some of these behaviors before in guilty dog videos, or dogs that are getting caught doing something they're not supposed to be doing. And what's important to know is a lot of dogs have just learned through previous experiences that when I get caught with this, I get in trouble, or they're reading their owner's body language and seeing something in that body language that is causing them to display these appeasement or avoidance behaviors. They're not actually feeling guilt, they're just trying to avoid punishment, make you go away, because they are sensing that there's a threat in the environment and they need to offer these appeasement behaviors. A dog that's higher up on that ladder of aggression will be showing these threat behaviors. So these are warning signals meant to increase distance between whatever it is in the environment that's scaring them and themselves. So a lot of times in the shelter, we are that stressor and they're trying to increase distance between us and them. And if we press further, we might provoke a bite. So, like I said, these are usually behaviors that are indicating fear and meant to increase distance between the stressor and themselves. So the typical behaviors we're going to see, we'll see the body starts to tense up, they become very stiff and rigid. We see that in that subtle body language in their face, like in this first picture with that really tight mouth, kind of a hard eye, ears back. They might start baring their teeth. Vocalizing towards us, so growling, snarling, barking. The hackles might go up. Again, that is not on its own a sign of aggression, just arousal, but it is indicating fear, where if we put that together with these other behaviors, we would consider that a threat behavior. So if we're seeing these behaviors from a dog, it is imperative that we adjust our approach and increase distance, because if we continue to press forward, what's likely going to happen is the dog will snap or bite, because all of these other methods they used to signal to us that they were uncomfortable and needed space, we didn't heed their warning, and so now it's going to progress to a dangerous situation. It's worth pointing out that not all of the concerning behavior we see in shelter dogs is coming from fear, but it could also be due to frustration or over-arousal. The shelter is a very stressful place, and this can manifest differently in different dogs. So for instance, a lot of dogs will jump and bark at their kennel door, and to somebody without a whole lot of knowledge of working in a shelter, that dog might appear to be aggressive. And though some of these dogs are experiencing fear, others are just frustrated or over-aroused in the shelter environment, and one way that they display that is by jumping and barking as people pass by their kennels. And still, some dogs might behave in ways that are dangerous, even though they're not fearful or aggressive. They're just overly aroused. So these dogs might jump or mouth you, which means they put their mouth on you and they're using pressure, and they can still break skin or bruise. They're not fearful or aggressive, but they're so frustrated that they're using their mouth to control something, and that can be dangerous. They might height seek or muzzle punch, which means they're jumping up towards your face, sometimes with an open mouth. Again, they're not quote-unquote aggressive dogs, but they are so frustrated or over-aroused that it is a dangerous situation for a person to be in. Humping is another behavior we see that's coming from that frustration, arousal type place. And though a lot of people commonly think that humping is a quote-unquote dominance behavior, that's not at all what we're seeing. These dogs are in a state of over-arousal, and they might hump, and can be very difficult to get off, and can even be dangerous in some situations because they can cause scratching and bruising and be very difficult to redirect. And then if you do get the dog off, they might become further amped up and start doing that jumpy, mouthy behavior. So even though these aren't quote-unquote aggressive behaviors, these are behaviors that we have to work with in the shelter environment, because dogs can be in such a high state of frustration or arousal. Now that we've discussed how to read dogs' body language and behavior to understand what they're trying to communicate to us, Next, we're going to learn more about how we can reduce their fear and stress when we interact with them, not only to make them more comfortable, but to keep you safe as well. In order to make dogs feel more comfortable and less stressed with us, we have to understand how our body language affects them. The way humans communicate and interact with each other is extremely different from how dogs interact with each other, and this starts with the way we greet each other. When humans greet, we typically have a frontal direct approach, so we walk straight towards each other head on. We make a lot of eye contact. We are in close proximity, and we might touch or hug or shake hands at some point during that interaction. Dogs have very different greeting rituals, and when we greet them as we greet other people, that makes them very uncomfortable. So when dogs greet each other, they typically have an indirect approach, so they don't walk straight towards each other. They kind of have a curved approach. They curve their bodies when they're interacting. There's a lot of sniffing. They kind of briefly interrupt each other or themselves and check in and check out. They don't make a whole lot of eye contact. So if you contrast that with how humans greet each other, there are very big differences just in how we say hello. Unfortunately, most people don't realize that the way we tend to greet and interact with dogs is pretty stressful for them. You can see in these photos by looking at the dog's body language that they're uncomfortable with the interactions they're having with these people. So in each picture you can see the person is in very close proximity to the dog. There's a lot of frontal and direct approaches here, making a lot of eye contact with the dog, and especially the touching, reaching over, sticking a hand in the dog's face. All of these things will make a dog uncomfortable. If you can imagine meeting a person for the first time and they're staring at you, sticking their hand in your face, touching your head, trying to kiss you, that would make anyone uncomfortable. When a dog doesn't know you, all of these behaviors can make them feel threatened and cause them to react, especially if they're already in a state of fear. When meeting a dog, whether it's in the kennel or when the dog's being walked on leash, it's important to follow all of these suggestions. So first of all, approach slowly. We know dogs don't like a direct frontal approach, and they also don't like a fast approach because we're excited to see them. That can be threatening to them. So we want to approach slowly, and we want to turn our body sideways. So you can see in the photos below, each of these individuals have their body turned slightly sideways, so 45 to 90 degrees sideways from the dog, so we're not having that frontal direct approach. Most of the time, as long as it's safe, we want to get low, so we're not hovering over, we don't have our hands on our knees, hunched over, because that's scary for a dog, but we're squatting down or getting low and letting the dog approach us. And we're not making a whole lot of eye contact. So we're using our peripheral vision and looking just past the dog, so we're not looking at the dog directly in the eyes, because as we've talked about, that is also threatening to a dog. So we don't loom over the dog, we kind of keep our distance and allow them to approach us. We're not going to thrust our hand in their face and make them sniff our hand. That's actually something that we've been taught to do that's completely inappropriate. We want to just kind of have our hand out so the dog can choose to come up and sniff us. We're going to speak softly. A lot of us love dogs and we get excited to see them, but speaking loudly, using a high-pitched voice, all of those things can be scary for a dog, so we're just going to speak softly. In the shelter, we're most likely going to be using treats, so just toss treats. We don't need a dog to take a treat from our hand. We're just going to toss treats and allow them to come up and sniff us and interact with us if they are interested in it. We never want to force an interaction. So especially if this is just a dog we're meeting in the hallway because we think it's cute and we want to say hi, there's no reason to force that interaction. We're going to let them slowly approach us, and if they are sticking around and showing relaxed body language, then we can pet and interact with them. We're going to monitor the dog's body language throughout that interaction and look for signs that they might be getting uncomfortable, and again adjust our approach. So maybe we're trying to pet them and we notice when we reach over the dog's neck or back, the dog kind of freezes up a little. We're going to adjust our approach and kind of start over again. And we're always going to ask, because there are dogs being walked around the shelter that might not be appropriate to interact with. We have dangerous dogs, potentially dangerous dogs, bite quarantine dogs, all kinds of dogs coming through the shelter. We have dogs with stranger danger that behavior staff might be working with that have a very prescribed training regimen with interacting with new people. So you always ask the handler before you try to interact with a dog. All of these strategies also apply to meeting a dog in the kennel area. When interacting with the dog through the kennel, it's important to remember how to adjust your body language so you're using an appropriate approach. The kennel area may be the most stressful place for a dog in the entire shelter because dogs are barking and unfamiliar people are passing by their kennel all day long. So if when you meet a dog through the kennel, you stand directly in front of the kennel, make a lot of eye contact or stare at them, talk to them, even if you're saying something like, "It's okay," or "Quiet down," that can make a fearful or frustrated dog even more stressed out. So what you want to do is turn your body sideways, avoid making direct eye contact, speak softly, and toss treats. Tossing treats helps scared dogs learn that people coming to their kennel isn't so scary because something good happens. Someone comes to my kennel, I get a treat. We see dogs barking at the kennel fronts a lot, and they do it for different reasons. So sometimes it's out of frustration or excitement. Some of them want attention. Some of them are fearful. If you stand in front of the kennel and interact with them while they're barking, you end up rewarding a frustrated dog for that behavior by giving them attention or making a fearful dog even more nervous. But if you use appropriate body language and toss a treat when you pass by, particularly when they're being calm or quiet, then you reinforce the desirable behavior instead of the bad behavior. It's important to remember that you are training an animal every time you interact with it, whether you know it or not. Every interaction is a learning experience for that animal, and we want them to learn to trust us, not to fear us or be intimidated by us. That's why we use reward-based training in the shelter. This means that we give them rewards, usually food, praise, petting, toys, to help them form positive associations with us and other things in the environment. And it also means that we reward them for the behaviors we want rather than punishing them for the behaviors we don't want. So instead of popping a dog's leash for barking at another dog, we reward them for being calm by praising them and giving them a treat. We avoid using any tools and techniques that are aversive, meaning they startle or intimidate a dog by using fear and pain. This would be basic forms of verbal or physical punishment, including things like alpha rolls and pinching dogs' ears, grabbing their muzzles, things like that, along with so-called training tools like shock collars and prong collars. This type of training is rooted in the idea that we have to be dominant over dogs and teach them that we're their leaders and they have to respect us. Dogs are not in a constant struggle to be alpha, to outrank humans or dominate us. They see us as social partners, not members of their pack that they have to establish dominance over. This type of dominance training is outdated, and it's been shown to create behavioral problems rather than fix them. So there are multiple studies showing that dogs trained with these techniques are more fearful and anxious, they're less trainable, and usually we see exacerbated aggression in these dogs, and they impair the human-dog bond as well. So it's our job to teach dogs to trust that their interactions with people will be safe and predictable, so we can minimize their chances of feeling threatened and then reduce their motivation to become aggressive. Now we're going to move on to some strategies to help you stay safe in potentially threatening situations. If you're threatened by a loose dog, which could happen in different situations, for instance, if a dog gets loose in the kennel or is running loose in the hallway, something like that, there are a few different things you're going to want to do. So first of all, stop all movement Avert your eye contact. We know that the eye contact we give dogs can be threatening, so we don't want to look directly at the dog. Turn your body sideways to the dog and cross or lower your arms. Move away slowly. Don't just bolt. You want to move away slowly. And if you have treats on you, you could try tossing them to distract the dog. Put something between you and the dog if the dog is still coming towards you, like a Kuranda bed or a trash can or a chair or something like that. If a dog were to get a hold of your sleeve and you have a jacket on, you could try to feed that to the dog. So slip it off of yourself and feed it to the dog so you can get away. And every kennel will have a radio, so you could also radio for help. What you don't want to do is make sudden or abrupt movements, yell at or threaten the dog, approach or try to touch the dog, scream or panic, or make eye contact with the dog. All of these things could be perceived as threatening to the dog and then make a potentially dangerous situation even more dangerous. If you're walking a dog on leash and the dog starts going after you, whether it's actually being aggressive or sometimes we see dogs do this when they are highly aroused and become unruly, what you'll want to do is hold the leash out with a straight arm, kind of getting closer to the collar so you can create distance between your body and the dog, and call for help or wait for the dog to calm down. Otherwise, you can try back tying the dog. So this means you feed the leash through something like a fence, wrapping it around a tree, feeding it through a doorway, or around a post or pole of some sort. And that creates space between you and the dog so you can get help. Sometimes you'll want to get another leash on the dog so two people can safely walk the dog, or in a really dangerous situation, you might have to have somebody pull the dog to safely get it away from you. And what you don't want to do, again, is to attempt to touch the dog to calm the dog down, especially if you have a dog that's highly aroused. That's not going to help. Again, don't make eye contact with the dog or scream or panic. Dog fights happen in the shelter. The most common situations where we see dog fights are either when a dog escapes its kennel or the handler loses the leash and the dog runs up to another dog, or during play groups or dog introductions. Dog fights are very dangerous for people and they can often lead to bites because when dogs are in fight mode, they can easily redirect their aggression onto a person or accidentally bite a person when they think they're biting the other dog. So it's important to know how to safely break up a dog fight so that you're not injured in the process. There are several dog fight breakup kits placed throughout the shelter with some of the items that we'll talk about here on this slide that can assist you in breaking up a dog fight. So first, don't try breaking up a dog fight alone. You'll want to yell or radio for help. Trying to break them up alone can be really dangerous and put you in a bad situation, so always try to get help. If the dogs are wearing leashes, you'll want to try to pull the dogs apart by the leashes. If the leashes are wrapped around each other, then you're going to want to try one of the other methods described here. The most effective and appropriate method to break up a dog fight is going to depend on the circumstances of the fight. So you'll need to decide which method will most quickly and safely stop the fight based on the situation you're observing. So some of these methods can stop a fight by startling the dog or offending their senses long enough that you can interrupt the interaction and get them separated. So first, you can try making a loud, startling noise. You can do this by clanging metal bowls or hitting the kennel door with an item. If you're outside and you have the metal trash can lids, you can try banging those together, anything to make a loud, abrupt sound. You can also try throwing water or spraying the dogs with water. You can get water from their bowls, from watering cans. If you're outside and there's a hose, that's a good option, or using the spray bottles that are in the kits that I discussed or elsewhere in the shelter. You can try throwing a thick blanket over dogs, particularly smaller dogs, to reduce arousal and block their vision, and that also protects the handlers while they're trying to physically separate the dogs. If those methods don't work, you can sound the air horn that's in the fight kit. but use caution because it's very loud. But this will also help alert others if help is needed. So after doing an initial burst of the air horn, don't continue sounding it if it wasn't successful the first time. We don't just need more and more noise because that can cause too much stimulation and it's not going to help break up the dog fight. In the kit, there is also Pet Corrector, and you can spray that in short bursts near the dog's face. This is just compressed air, and it can startle the dog long enough that you can pull them away from each other, again, hopefully by the leashes. Another option is to use Spray Shield near the dog's face. This product contains citronella, and that's aversive to dogs. Studies show it's just as effective as pepper spray without the harmful effects. If dogs are engaged in a more serious fight or one dog is latched on to the other dog, more invasive strategies are probably going to be needed to interrupt the fight. So one option is to wrap a slip lead or a leash around the aggressor's neck and twist while pulling to essentially make it difficult for him to breathe just long enough that you can interrupt the fight and get them separated. Or if the dog is wearing a collar, which most of our dogs would be, you could twist the collar to tighten it around the dog's neck, again, to cut off airflow just long enough that you can get them separated. Another strategy is to grab the dog by its back legs and kind of like a wheelbarrow, and then hold them high on the leg near the groin, lift up and swing the dog in a circle. This makes the dogs, it forces them to focus on sidestepping their front feet and keep their chins from hitting the ground, and you can get the dogs away from each other that way. However, that's more of a physical intervention, and we always want you to put your safety first before getting your body too close to the other dogs. If a dog is latched on and won't release, you don't want to try pulling the dogs apart because this can just cause more tearing. In that situation, a trained staff member can insert a break stick between the dog's teeth to pry the jaws open. This requires training. Not anybody can use a break stick, and there are some dangers to it. So only certain staff will have access to a break stick. And the person using the break stick should wear Kevlar gloves and have a good hold on the dog's collar or leash so the dog doesn't redirect onto the person once separated. And if possible, put on the Kevlar gloves that are in the bite kits before using any of these tactics that involve touching the dog's body or applying anything near the face, just for your safety. Many of the strategies to break up a dog fight that people instinctively try actually put them at risk of injury and likely only worsen the situation. The following methods that we're discussing here should never be used when you're trying to break up a dog fight. So first of all, do not grab the dog's collars. It's very likely that a dog will head flip and then land a bite on your arm or your hand. We see a lot of bites happen this way. So even though it's going to be your instinct to grab the collar, try one of the other strategies we discussed instead. Don't scream at, hit, or kick the dogs. Again, this might be your initial instinct, particularly screaming will be an instinct, but these actions will likely heighten the arousal of the dogs and then intensify the aggression. So you want to avoid screaming and then any type of physical hitting or kicking. Don't get in between the dogs involved. A dog could easily redirect onto you in that situation. So if at any point the dogs separate, whether they do on their own or through one of the strategies you used, use a barrier like a coranda bed, a gate, a trash can, a door, anything you can find to keep them apart. Don't use your body to block one dog from the other dog. And don't pick up a dog. Not only could that dog redirect onto you, but the other dog might try jumping up and biting the other dog if it's in your arms, and then you are again at a risk of being injured. So again, use a barrier to separate the dogs if you're able to get them apart from each other. There are items in each of the kennel areas that are there for your safety. So first of all, we have radios mounted on charging stations in each kennel area. If you are in need of assistance, grab one of those radios, make sure it's on channel 1, and alert the others that you need help. We also have dog fight breakup kits in several of the kennel areas with those items that we discussed earlier. If neither of those options work for you, you can call dispatch at 402-444-7800, extension 0, and they can help you as well. If a dog bites you, remain calm and get yourself to a safe place away from the dog. Ask for help if needed, whether it's having somebody take the dog from you or finding first aid. Be sure to report the bite to your supervisor or to the customer service desk as soon as possible. We really don't want you leaving campus without reporting the bite, because if the dog broke skin, we need to get the dog set up on quarantine as soon as possible. And be sure when you check in with your supervisor or customer service, you fill out the accident report that is required. Of course, preventing threatening situations from arising in the first place is the best option, and there are a few things you can do to help with this. So first of all, know the safety protocols discussed here and in any additional trainings you're given by your manager or supervisor. Refresh your knowledge often. These are situations that you probably won't encounter all that often, so refreshing yourself with these trainings is never a bad idea. Get comfortable reading dogs' body language either through working with them or finding additional trainings and resources, which we are happy to provide you with if you're interested. When handling a dog, remember to be your dog's advocate. That means looking out for signs they're stressed or uncomfortable. If they're scared, asking others for space, asking people to move out of the way in the hallway, whatever it is, be your dog's advocate. Remember to always secure the latches on the kennel doors. If the doors aren't closed and latched properly, dogs can jump hard enough against the doors to pop them open and escape, and that can lead to threatening situations like dog fights or even aggressive dogs getting out of their kennels and putting a person in a really scary situation. So it's very important to always put that carabiner or that clip on the kennel door. When you are walking dogs throughout the shelter, use your mirrors and be vigilant. Don't just walk around a corner without looking or burst through a doorway. We need to keep the dog safe and everybody else safe, so make sure you are very vigilant when you're walking throughout the shelter. And then lastly, over-communicate. Know when to ask for help. If you are unsure or uncertain of a protocol or your comfort level working with a dog, make sure you tell someone and ask for help. If you have a behavioral concern about a dog, make sure you communicate that to us by filling out a yellow sheet. So you will fill out the side that says notification of behavioral concerns. You'll see there are all different types of behaviors that you can circle. We want to know what happened, where it happened, why do you think it happened, meaning what was going on in that situation, who you are, when it happened, and any other notes. We want to make sure what is getting communicated on these yellow sheets is objective, not subjective, meaning we want to know your observation, not your interpretation. So a subjective interpretation would be something like, dog just freaked out, very food aggressive. An objective observation would be a description of exactly what you saw. The dog froze, hard stared, lunged, barked, and then hovered over the food bowl as I entered the kennel. After you fill this out, you'll hang it on the dog's kennel, usually over their dog walking cart if they have one, and then behavior staff will develop a plan for the dog and monitor the behavior. If there is something really concerning going on, we want to know right away, so please contact a member of the behavior team, email us, or write something on the whiteboard outside the bark room. You'll see this side of the yellow sheet once the behavior team writes out the plan for intervention, so it will be important that you read that top box there and then record any observations you have of the dog when you interact with them in the middle area of the yellow sheet here. And then if you observe any new concerns, you're going to write that under the other observations column. And then at the bottom, you'll want to look for any special instructions that pertain to you as well. Well, that concludes this presentation on safe interactions with dogs. If you have any questions, feedback, want more resources, you can contact anyone on the NHS behavior team. A few additional resources I'll tell you about here. Fear-Free Shelter Certification, that's free to shelter staff and workers, and it has a lot of great information on canine body language and a lot of other aspects of keeping the shelter as stress-free as possible. The ASPCA has a webinar series called Speaking Dog that is all about canine body language and behavior. And there are a lot of great books out there as well. The Other End of the Leash by Patricia McConnell, The Culture Clash by Jean Donaldson, and Canine Body Language by Brenda Alloff are all great ones to check out.